I started blogging in about 2004, 2005. It came out of moving to London. I started engaging in the cinema scene here because I grew up in Ireland and there wasn't really a diverse cinema scene there. So I was really just consuming everything I could as soon as I came to London. And I just wanted an outlet to write about it. So I started a blog with no real thought to taking it seriously in any way. But then people started reading the blog, commenting, and it seemed that people wanted to hear what had to say. And then I started getting into touch with, let me just start again. I started applying for the London Film Festival on the basis of my blog in about 2007. And that's when I really thought that, I could get some access with this. I could get some, reach with this. So that's where it kind of came from. I have a full-time day job. I work in the advertising industry. I barely make money from it. I mean, occasionally I get paid for magazine articles, small amounts here and there, but I have a mortgage, so that has to take priority. So everything I do is based around my day job. They're very good, actually, at letting me have time off in the afternoon if I need to go and interview someone. I take 3 weeks off from work to do the London Film Festival every year, and most of my holiday time is taken up with festivals or film-related activities. So I try and pack in as much as I can, but my day job is also very time-consuming and very exhausting, and I spend all day looking at a computer, so it's very hard to then go home and sit in front of my laptop and write a review when I just want to kind of close my eyes to the world at that point. So it's a real struggle to try and find that balance. I think people hear the word criticism and think sometimes that we are out to attack, that we are looking for flaws, whereas I don't think that's the case. I think it's about contextualizing. And it's about kind of, finding or allowing people to see something in a new way, because art is so subjective. There's that line that, Tarkovsky, I think, said, if you show a film to 1,000 people, it's 1,000 different films. So it's about giving people a different perspective on something. I think, the word criticism or critique sometimes has a negative connotations for people. I'm looking to write about something in order sometimes to articulate my own feelings about it. Sometimes I might start a review or start a piece of writing without fully understanding how I feel about the thing I'm writing about. So it's a means for me to kind of explore the film and the subject at hand. So I don't think it's not necessarily criticism that I'm doing. It's evaluation, it's contemplation, it's a whole bunch of things, really. The first thing I tend to do after watching a film is I might jot down a few quick notes that are immediately swirling around inside my mind. Just to put them down, because they're obviously things that have kind of leapt out at me and things I might want to return to later. When I sit down to actually write the review, I think the key thing for me is getting started. I really need to get the opening of the review out of the way, and after that I find it flows quite easily. Getting past that opening line is a real hump sometimes, and a real obstacle, and I can go back and revise that opening a dozen times before I can then move on with the rest of the review. So it's about finding a way in, finding an angle on the material. Once I've actually got started, I can write a review relatively quickly. But it's the process of actually getting started and finding my way into the material. For me, film criticism is about giving something context and perspective and allowing people to take another look at a film. I think there's an idea these days that films are available all over the internet, that everything is accessible, that people can kind of curate films themselves, but people need films to be curated for them. They need kind of contextualizing, they need a recommendation, they need someone to say, hey, this is great, look at this. There are many films in recent years that would have almost died a death in cinemas if it wasn't for critics kind of banging the drum for them. Films like Margaret, Beyond the Lights, The Immigrant last year. These were films that were totally dumped by the distributor because they didn't know how to sell it to people, and the critics had to kind of pull them out and say, look, this is worth seeking out. So it's about kind of celebrating cinema and kind of bringing films to people and kind of helping and sharing that experience with them. The films that we screen are all films that we feel very passionately about, and the our main purpose is simply to share these films with people. We want them to experience them in the best possible way. We give them program notes that give them context and background and insight into the film. We want to discuss the films with them. It's all about just, bringing films to people and helping them understand them, helping them get the best possible experience out of them. How well does the film succeed in achieving the aims that it sets out to achieve? I think you have to judge each film on its own terms. You would judge a mainstream action movie in a different way that you would judge a kind of art house personal project. They're each trying to do different things, and you have to look at it and say, okay, how well does this film meet its goals? That's how I would evaluate a film. Everyone, I guess, approaches it in a different way. For me, I'm kind of just trying to express what I got out of the film. It's kind of, I have a personal reaction to the film. I like films to move me and stimulate me, and sometimes leave me kind of shaken or almost have a visceral physical response to them. And then if I can somehow express that to an audience to say this is what this film did for me, then I think that's a valuable thing to kind of share with people. I'm not someone who genuinely likes to talk about my own personal feelings and my own life, but then sometimes if you have a very personal response to a film, then you do have to be strong enough to address that and kind of maybe open it up to people, and that is kind of a difficult thing to do. Some people, some critics are very, very personal, and I find that superb. I find that fascinating. I think someone like Roger Ebert always had a deeply personal response, and he kind of connected to things in his own life, and that's why I found his writing so stimulating. That's a quite difficult thing for me to do, but it's something that I would like to be stronger at and kind of be bolder at. I think star ratings are useful as a marketing tool, but I absolutely hate them very much. And I hate having to give them. Some of the publications I write for, that's something I have to do. And it's very kind of disheartening to write, maybe 1,000-word review. And then if you put a star rating at the end, you might think people will only look at the star rating and say, oh, 3 stars, not going to bother. Whereas you might have looked at all the complications of how that film gets 3 stars. Why is it an average film? Where does it fail? Where does it succeed? Some 3-star films are very interesting and might be worth seeking out because they have, real value in them. But then if you boil that down to a simple number at the end, I think it's a real kind of cheapening of your criticism, your evaluation. And I try and avoid it wherever possible. I tend not to review the big sort of blockbuster movies for these publications. And I have heard stories in the past of certain magazines being forced to give big films a good star rating in order to secure their access, and that's part of the kind of the deal that they make. But I haven't been involved in any of that. I give the star rating that I feel best reflects what I've tried to say about the film. Then I leave it at that. But it's very much a kind of afterthought, really. I just kind of slap a star rating on it and then just don't think about it afterwards. I mean, I've been lucky in the sense that the editors I work with are generally very open at changes they would make to my copy, and they come back and check them with me, and that's fair enough. It hasn't happened. The only instance I can think of is when I gave a film 5 stars and my editor came back and says, I'm trying to keep 5 stars for, real masterpieces. I want to knock this down to 4, and I was fine with that. But if I did open the publication and then find out that it suddenly added a star or lost a star, I would question it, certainly, and I would want an answer as to why that was done and why I wasn't consulted. I think the big change I've seen is probably down to the emergence of Twitter. That's kind of seems like a real kind of watershed moment as well for criticism, as the internet was in the first place, because instant reactions are now more valued than considered reactions. I think people are desperately looking for articles that will secure hits. They want to be the first one out there with the review, not necessarily right, but they have to be first. I think we've seen it recently with the James Bond movie, where 5-star reviews were going up within an hour of the press screening. Hastily written, kind of, put together as quickly as possible to get that first reaction out there. And you see, these magazines and newspapers tweeting, saying, we're going to have the first review within minutes, watch this space. And it's just, I don't see the value in that at all. I think that totally, again, just cheapens the practice of evaluating art. You see it, it's not just the blockbuster movies, you see it at the festivals, at Cannes. You see people dropping their reviews within moments of the film being screened. And again, who are they writing for? Most people won't see these films for 6 months. So why are they so desperate to be first? It's like this race now, and I don't think anyone benefits from having that kind of rush to have a reaction. I think of some of the movies that have had instant reactions at Cannes. I think of The Tree of Life, for example, where I couldn't even think straight for a couple of hours after seeing that movie. I had to go and walk and contemplate and try and work out what I felt about it. I couldn't imagine turning around a review within an hour of that film. It would be gobbledygook. But that's the pressure that these critics are under now, because they have to get this first article, they have to get the hits. But the newspapers have to think of their advertising budgets. They have to think of the relationships they have with these studios. That's a real kind of a deal with the devil that they've made, and it's a very difficult situation because, at the end of the day, bills have to be paid, money has to come in. What role does the critic play in that? They're an employee of the newspaper, but again, they have to be an independent voice as well to look at this piece of art. So that's a very difficult situation to try and resolve. Twitter is a fantastic tool for meeting kind of like-minded individuals. I think I've met a lot of critics and who have now become friends through Twitter. I'm in communication with critics from around the world who I've admired for many years, a number of American critics who I can now discuss films with on Twitter. It really kind of brings people together in a great way. And again, you're just sharing information, sharing, promoting films, sharing great piece of writing. It's a fantastic tool in that sense. Every tool can be a great tool or a real kind of a damaging tool. So in terms of the aggregators, it can be very useful if you just use them to get easy access to great writers and great reviews. But again, it simplifies things because people look at it and say, oh, this film has only got 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, it can't be any good, and they dismiss it out of hand. Podcasts, again, can be great. There are some podcasts where people have really great long-form discussions and analysis, and I think of the You Must Remember This podcast, which looks at cinema history, the Cinephiliacs, Bret Easton Ellis, great discussions about cinema and about the culture in general. So there are just smart people will always use these tools well, and will always kind of get the most value out of them. I still get a buzz out of being out of my writing being in print that I don't get out of being online. When I get something published in Sight and Sound, that's the thrill for me. Even if they didn't pay me, I'd be happy to have my article in Sight and Sound because I've been reading it since I was a kid, and it's I've always seen it as the height of film criticism in this country, anyway.
And say you'd be happy not to be paid out loud.
Oh yes. He's out there now listening. So yeah, I feel that print for me I've always felt it just has a kind of legitimacy, and I still get a great thrill out of being published in print, and I hope that continues. I don't want to spend my whole life looking at a screen. I love reading magazines in their physical format. I still read the newspaper every now and then. I try to avoid going onto the newspaper website as much as possible to try and actually read the physical thing. So yeah, I want print to continue. I think it will continue. I think people will always want some kind of physical object to peruse and have reference to. I find it very hard to see people making a living out of pure film criticism in the future. The very few people who do it regularly are lucky, I think, at the moment. Newspapers seem to give less and less value to arts criticism, and you see great websites like Grantland, for example, is a recent one that's been shut down by ESPN, even though that was home to some of the best critics in the business. So I think it's getting narrower and narrower in terms of the number of people who can actually make a living out of writing about film, and it's very worrying. I think the future is going to be people just writing on their passion projects, which is what I tend to do, and having full-time jobs to pay the bills. And it's very disheartening when you see things like Grantland closing down. You see things like The Dissolve, which was a great home for film writing, lasted barely more than a year, because they really tried to do it in a way with integrity, and they got nowhere. So they look like they're being, cautionary tales for people who want to go out there and try and, do something serious with film writing, because they're not succeeding in this current climate. I value recommendations from people when I know they really know what they're talking about. It's like there is that line that everyone is a critic, but some people's criticism comes from a place of knowledge and a breadth of information that they, gives their opinion more value. And I think that is important. I think, again, it comes back to curation. Someone who has seen more films and kind of has a deeper understanding of films is going to give you a better recommendation and kind of point you in a more interesting direction than someone who's seen a handful of films. So it's very important, I think, to have knowledgeable people sharing their views on art. I tend to find the London Film Festival attracts a lot of crazy people. Q&As, for example, I one day want to compile a book of all the stupid Q&A questions that have been asked at London Film Festival. I always think back to the one with Gaspar Noé, where after the screening of Enter the Void, where a woman tried to get hired for a job, telling him that she's a fearless actress standing up in the middle of the BFI audience. And another man asked Gaspar Noé, are you interested in 3D movies? And he says, yes, I'm very interested in 3D. And then he says, and what about when we go beyond 3D and films are directly downloaded into our brain? What do you think of that? And he was, totally nonplussed. So I think they Q&As tend to be at the London Film Festival. I always find a pretty bizarre experience. Yeah. If you do something that is rewarding for yourself, I think other people will react to that passion that you put into it, and that kind of, when you do something personal, it connects with other people in a personal way. I always find, people will react to it because they sense that there's something of yourself in there. You put something in there and you're trying to say something, and people relate to that, I think. I sometimes find it intimidating to write about films that I've really, really loved. I find it hard, like, have I got the tools to fully articulate why this is great and do it justice? You always have to remember that there's kind of there's a filmmaker on the other end of that. So if you don't want to kind of be totally dismissive, you don't want to be cruel, especially I see a lot of really bad debut films, a lot of really bad kind of like, first time filmmakers, low budget filmmakers and stuff. But you have to remember that they've given up their life to kind of do this. They're trying to communicate something, articulate something. And I have a friend who made a low budget film, and it got one terrible review in a national newspaper that was really like sadistically dismissive, and it totally crushed him, and I think you have to be conscious of the fact that when you're dealing with these independent films that might not be very good, someone's heart and soul is in there. Yeah. It's a different thing when you're dealing with a blockbuster movie that is terrible just because it's made by committee and it's sheer laziness. That's a different thing, because you're attacking a real kind of like a real malignant aspect of cinema in that sense, and about culture. But so I think you have to approach it in different ways in terms of the scale of the project and the ambitions of the project as well. Art is something that is totally subjective, so I don't think I could completely get rid of my own reaction and my own emotional response to something. I don't know, that would be more like a that's more like a product review or something. You know, it's kind of like when someone's reviewing a camera, they say, hey, it does this, 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 and this, and it does them well. That's it. So it's like, I think art is something much more complex and much more deeply felt. So I don't think it's, for me anyway, I don't think it's possible to do that. When you think of how you respond to a film, if a film kind of makes me, you know, cry, then is that because I've connected with it, or is that because the filmmaker has skillfully used the tools of cinema to make you cry in a, you know, in a kind of manipulative way? You know, swelling soundtrack, you know, and the shot of the tear-stained cheeks and stuff. So, I mean, I think of a recent example. I watched Sunset Song at the London Film Festival, and it knocked me out completely. I was so moved by it. And it is quite hard for me to articulate why I was moved by it, because there's something kind of ineffable about the way Davies uses the camera, the way the images kind of flow into one another. And so I don't know, am I having an intellectual response to that, or is it just purely a kind of visceral emotional one? All I know is I couldn't talk to anyone for like half an hour after the movie because I was just so destroyed by it. So that's something that I do want to watch again, actually, because I want to kind of see, was it just being taken by surprise, being caught unawares? Was it the fact that I'd already seen one kind of emotionally charged movie that day and I was kind of set up for this one? So I can take a step back and take a broader view of it. But generally, I think, you know, film is an emotional medium. I think, you know, I think people do have a deeply emotional response to it, and I think that's something you can't try and keep out of your evaluation of it. You can't try and keep out of your writing. If you do feel a deep response to a film, that you have to kind of share that with people and say, you know, this film really hit me hard, and this is why. So I do try and kind of express my emotional response through my writing, absolutely.